fell down the SCA rabbit hole initially in 1977, and then in 1978 I ran away screaming and said, nope, it's not for me. And then in 2000-ish, 2001, we met some people who were heavily involved in the SBA. And they're like, oh, you should come do what we do. And I'm like, been there, done that, don't want to do it again. But my husband was intrigued. And he kept making sad eyes at me. And here we are, 20-some years later, with girls on our head and highly involved. He does rapier and heavy, and I support the ANS community. If you were in my morning class, I got involved in ANS because after 2 years of sitting around watching him fight, I was bored. And I had to figure out something if we were going to keep doing this and doing it as family that I was interested in. And I have a little bit of an artistic streak, so the arts and sciences caught my attention. And I heard about this thing called the ANS Fair. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to promote the arts and sciences, I need to know what this is all about. So I entered the regional fair. Got a 2, which at that point bumped you up to Kingdom. Went to Kingdom, had one of those horrible experiences that people run away from, but I decided to stay and fight. I kind of stayed away for a couple of years, from the fair at least, not from ANS. And then I went back, and I decided the only way to change things was going to be from on the inside. And I needed to stay involved. So here I am, involved. I say a lot, please forgive me. I went down the decorated veil rabbit hole in about 2002 when we were preparing for a demo at the Hello Balloon Fest, Medieval Village. And I was preparing little signs to put up around the village that were informative and fun. And if you look down at the bottom of the first page, you'll see there's a sermon quote. There was a Friar Berthold from Regensburg, Germany, who has a infamous history of preaching to women. He did not like them. He did not like what they did. In particular, he did not like how much attention and time they spent decorating their veils. And he did several sermons on the topic of decorated clothing and veils in particular, and how much if they had only spent half as much time in the scriptures, they would be pious women. But if you know anything about preaching in the Middle Ages, you'll know this was not a 20-minute homily. This was like a 3-hour tirade against women and their decorative veils. So we know that decorative veils, at least in 13th century Germany, were not an uncommon thing. Because if they were uncommon, chances are he wouldn't have preached about it.
Aren't women supposed to wear veils in church as a sign of piety?
Yeah, but they should have been plain. But the same thing could be said about men. If they had read more scriptures instead of making war and other things, there'd have been a lot less face-born children.
Anyway, so were veils common? No, people did not. Yes and no, I guess is the right answer. Decorated veils, white veils, were dress-up clothing. They were church clothing. If you look closely at the illustrations of the time, particularly if you look at like calendars where they show people doing everyday things, what you've got on your head, basically a bandana, hair tied back, out of the way. It's going to keep your hair clean. It's going to keep it out of your face. It's going to protect you from the sun. That's what people did. They wore head coverings. The veil, as we think about the pretty white, flowy, decorated thing, or even undecorated, the pretty white, flowy veil, was not something that people walked around in every day. It was not something that women walked around in their homes. So it was dress-up clothing. So we're talking about the fancy. But it goes back, the history of decorated veils goes back to, if you look at the timeline here, BCE. And there is a, give me a funeral stone, because I can't pronounce the other word. If you look very closely at the woman sitting down, she's holding a child on her lap who later became a scribe. The edge of her veil has some kind of decoration. Somebody took the time to carve something into that stone to denote that she had a decorative edge on her head covering. I would tend to call what she's wearing more of a mantle than a veil. A mantle is a large piece of cloth that people would wear over their shoulders that could be picked up and put over the head, as opposed to a veil, which is a piece of fabric that is worn only on the head. Sometimes over the face, it can be pulled across and pinned, or it can be left hanging loose. In some cultures, men wore them more than women did. We don't see a lot of men wearing veils in the SCA, although we're seeing more of it because it was a thing and they're tired of having those bright red armor fronds on their necks, and so they're starting to cover them up, which is the main purpose behind a head covering and a veil, is to protect you from dirt and sun, and again, for women to hold their hair out. If you look, you can follow the timeline, and I've kind of given a very basic. We can spend hours looking at pictures and talking about France from here to here timeline, Germany from here to here timeline, Italy from here to here timeline. The Middle East has a whole different culture of veils, but we can still look at decorated veils in the Middle East, in Syria, in Yemen, in what became Israel, in Iran, in Iraq, all the way across. In the Ottoman Empire, we can look at veils, and they went from this big to floor length. They were everywhere. I can't think of a culture that did not have some kind of head covering that eventually someone somewhere put decoration. If anybody knows of anything like that, please tell me, because I'd love to include it in my research and my documentation. The handout I gave you here, in addition to the timeline, has some pictures that also give you a timeline. They go chronologically from left to right, top to bottom. And my favorite editing is what I call Dead Queen Elizabeth. She wasn't dead when they took the picture, but she was wearing blood-based makeup at the time. So she does look rather corpse-like in the painting, I think. But that's the latest one that I have. We can go much later and even beyond. We still wear decorated veils today. Has anybody been to a wedding?
There's communion in the Catholic Church.
They still wear veils.
They're
Yes,
still
you're correct.
required in the church, even for tourists, to cover their head in Italy.
Okay.
Just when I went there for art school, we all had to have
Coverings.
scarves that we put over our head.
I am old enough that I remember women having to cover their heads when I was a child every Sunday. So, didn't have to be a veil though, but frequently it was just a piece of fabric that was draped over the top of their head. That would be a veil. There's no distinct sizing to veils either. I went down, like I said, that little, give me just a second. I know I put something here. What I did with I am sad. I am no longer sad. So that quote put me down the rabbit hole initially, and then I immediately forgot about it because I got busy doing other things. And then I was at a household Christmas party, and one of our household members had submitted for a silent auction for a household fundraiser, a decorated veil, a beaded veil. And I bid on it. And I bid on it. And I bid on it. And at the last minute, I was outbid. And I was sad. Very shortly after that, it was right before the holidays in 2017, in the early 2018, my husband and I were informed that we were going to be the Baron and Baroness of Northwoods. So I went to her and I said, can I please commission you to make me a beaded veil in the Northwoods colors? And she gifted this to me for my investiture. This is the veil that really put me down the decorated veil rabbit hole. And I will be happy to pass it around and you can admire her lovely work. She is meticulous. That would be Mistress Urisa. And I have to give blame when blame is due, or credit where credit is due, but I blame her for really putting me down this little challenge of mine, especially at my age, working with 2mm beads mostly. Why didn't I do this when I had 25-year-old eyes?
Yeah, watch out.
Is there a loose one?
Yeah, there's a loose element that needs repair.
Okay, thank you for catching that. I did not see that. Considering I have worn that many times since March of 2018, I'm surprised it's as intact as it is, and I throw it in the washing machine. So, and dryer.
It does look like you're not just kind of slipped out.
Probably.
You're so safe.
Probably. I took a class for beading on fabric, and the instructor commented, "Oh, you don't need to tie them off." And I'm like, okay, you don't need to tie them off if you don't care if you lose all your work or not, but I tie off every element when I teach, and I will teach you to tie off every element. Because at least that way you're only going to lose a few beads and not your whole. Yeah. And you're not going to create a massive fall risk for anybody in your vicinity, because beads are slippery.
Even modern hand-tied pearl
Mhm.
necklaces are not it.
Correct. If it's a good one.
I'm lucky enough to have two. So.
Yeah. It makes a difference, because if the strings will break, regardless of whether it's cotton, linen, silk, or even wire, they will break and you will lose beads. So I've seen a lot of Viking beads go scattering all over the place. But that is a thing. So that is the actual culprit that has put me doing investigation. I like to say Mistress Urisa is a wonderful, wonderful woman and very, very generous, and she's always willing to teach. But I like to tease and say, when I asked her to show me how to do this, she said, "You're smart, figure it out for yourself." She did. That's very unlike her. She was totally willing. She has told me exactly how she did it. But I, like I said, blame and credit where credit is due. So, oh, yeah, I do see that. Yeah, that's an easy fix. Thank you for catching that. So when I went down I started collecting pictures. Let's go this way. I had a lot more pictures. I was going to do a slideshow, and then I thought, oh, we'll see how time goes. You can Google decorated veils, and you'll find them all through. My intermission in my slideshow is colored veils. They are not all white, nor are they all blue. When they're blue, they're usually on the Madonna. And I wonder, did she really wear a blue mantle all the time, or did she only ever painted using ultramarine?
I think that was a Renaissance.
I think it was a Renaissance art thing. But we can blame her for blue veils.
All of them have her blue gowns or blue mantles.
And blue is not a sign of purity; it's a sign of loyalty and loyalty. And yeah, interesting. But if you look at these pictures, you'll see next to the PC medallion is a 1300. We have the Madonna. She's a little green, sorry. If you look at what she's wearing, there appears to be a ribbon attached to the edge of the veil. Not all decorated veils are beaded. Some have embroidery. Some have, I believe there's a class starting very shortly in another room, ruffles. Some have ribbons. There were lots of different ways of decorating things. I have yet to find, I have seen in the SCA some beautiful stamped veils. I have not found any evidence for that. But why not? Just because it didn't exist. I do a form of edging called Turkish Oya needle lace. That's what I'm wearing. There are no extant pieces from period, but the oral history in the area of Turkey goes back before period. Not only veils, underwear, dish towels, bedding, dresses. If you look at 16th century Italian needle lace, I guarantee you its origin came from the Middle East, from Turkey.
It's a very strong
same
relationship between
and
Turkey
there's a
and
trade
Venice.
route that you can follow too, and the timing fits. So there's a long history, but the Italians like to take credit for needle lace, so we, of course, we can let them do that. Next to the Madonna here, you see the ruffled veil. And then if you look at the next picture, it's hard to see in this little one, but that veil, and I picked these for a reason, appears to have a ribbon and beads on it. That would be the one here on the right, on the end. So she must have had a lot of time to waste and upset the local priest. I would think, like anything, somebody might commission somebody if they didn't have the skills or the talent, that it could be bought or that it could be hand done. We like to think that in period everybody did everything. Everybody had sheep in their backyard. Everybody sheared their own sheep, carded their own wool, spun it, wove it, dyed it, made fabric out of it, and made their own clothing. Everybody had an oven in their home and grew wheat and milled it and made their own bread. That's not true. That didn't happen. Not every home had an oven. There were bakeries that can be documented as early as 800. And I'm sure probably before that, just no documentation. Oh wait, we talked about bakers in the Bible. Mm-hmm. So bread might have been a staple, but it wasn't necessarily something that every woman made. But it was common enough that we don't have documentation for recipes either. So we don't have documentation for how they beaded the veils. We can look at pictures. Is it 100% accurate? We don't know. But there's enough artistic documentation to say it's not that far off. Because if you look at all the pictures, there's a lot of pearls. But you only find them in paintings of women who lived near the sea. You don't find a lot of pearls on African veils in the center of the continent. You don't find them inland in Spain and France. You find them in the coastal region. Makes sense. People used what was available to them. Pearls were easy enough to get if you lived in the right area, just like certain dyes were easy to get if you lived in the right areas and certain things grew. Then as we progress, you'll notice probably wool for the Madonna, probably linen or a lightweight wool. And I'm very excited. I actually found veil weight wool and I have it ordered. It just didn't get here in time. It's coming from overseas, but I'm hoping in the future to have that to, one, make a veil out of, and two, show around in class, because I've always been intrigued by that, because my research always said that veils were made out of wool, and I'm like, ew. But no, it's very fine and thin. Probably silk. Probably linen or wool. This one I can't decide. If you look at the one on the bottom for 1420, anybody want to take a guess? Is that lace on the edge? Is it pleating on the edge? Is it a toned down form of a ruffle on the edge? There's definitely a painted decoration in this portrait, but we don't know what it is. And I can't find any documentation on what it is, so your guess is as good as mine. And is valid. And then we move over to 1460, where I've given you a close-up of a very, very sheer veil with what appears to be a golden edge with very definitely two different colored beads of some sort hanging off of it. And I have, if we pass this around, this is a crepe. That is one weight of, that is silk.
So this isn't crochet, this is all that she's doing knotting?
No, that's actually done with a crochet, which there is evidence for in the crepe. And I know a lot of favorite people are going to go, they didn't crochet, period. I have proof that they did. This is also silk.
I need to get me some of that. That'd be great for garments for summer too. What's your source for the silk?
Done trading.
Really?
Yep. That is also silk.
What weight is that?
I'd have to go back and look. It's the one is the chiffon.
Okay.
The heavier one is the body. This is also silk.
Oh, that's heavy.
Now that I did dye. It did come in a raw, unbleached color. But that was a commission for somebody's floral elevation to fit her persona. So you can see lots of different choices. Not everything has to be the white shiny silky veil, and I'm happy to see a green veil.
That's the perfect.
It's entirely appropriate now.
Okay, it's silk, but it's not exactly it's pretty modern.
But it fits. And like I said, I haven't been able to find anything printed, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't done. One of the things, yes, what was this? The shiny one is Hibadi.
Hibadi, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
What is what? Hibadi is a type of silk that Dharma Trading carries. It would have been similar to an Italian silk that they would have used, maybe a charmeuse. They have different names for things, and I'm horrible with names.
Do you think like this from 1460? Do you think they really used the silk then?
I think that's what's coming. Yes, they did.
I've never been certain as someone who went to art school if that was an artistic. So there's a lot of it in.
I think we don't see it until about the mid-15th century. It could be. This is, yeah. That one? Yeah. That's a chiffon. This is chiffon. Yes. Hibadi.
No, the veil.
Crochet. This one is also a chiffon.
That's also chiffon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's just a different type of chiffon.
Sorry.
So lots of different types of silk. Lots of different types. I can't wait till I get my hands on that wall. I'm excited for that one. I'm sorry I don't have it to show for you. I just found it last week. I actually found it earlier, but I wasn't going to pay $140 140 euros a yard, and I paid for shipping from Europe. So yeah. And that would have been just 1 yard of it.
Yeah.
So
You need basically a yard to do.
The one that I'm wearing is a square yard. This one is about a 28-inch circle. This one is a much longer oval. I'm really finding that I think if you look at the pictures, other than the mantles, which were literally like a cloak, it was a leather garment, and mostly on the Madonna, I think women did not walk around with long down to their butt or down to the ground veils. One, regardless of how rich you were, it would have been a waste of fabric, and it would have been a pain in the I don't know. And yes, dangerous.
I wore one.
Dangerous with wagon wheels, dangerous with fire. If you've ever been there with a fire with silk, it burns pretty quickly and it smells pretty awful.
I wore one that was down to my butt to coronation. And I literally would sit down in my chair, pull it up, put it behind the chair.
Yeah.
And it was. I think it's a romanticized Victorian ideal. I think that's where
you look from see, as we look at some of these later on in the timeline, they're all roughly shoulder length. And yeah, when they're shoulder length, you don't sit on them. You can see your jewelry. They don't get caught on your clothing. If you have ever worn a linen veil on a linen dress, you'll know that the minute you go like this, your veil is still looking that way.
Yes, it sticks.
Yeah, it sticks. And cotton does the same thing, and it does the same thing with wool. The silky, slippery silks, which are a pain in the butt to work with, are about the only things like this that is not sticking to what I wear. So, lots of different things to think about in terms of what was doable and what wasn't. I have random plastic bags. That's interesting. But I do think that that very sheer one definitely was a thing.
It was more like this.
And I'm willing to bet that the beading was done on the ribbon first, and then the ribbon was sewn to the veil. And that's something that we don't think about. We always think that the decoration is done on the edge of the fabric. But beads and fabric are expensive. One of the reasons we don't have a lot of extant things is one, fabric disintegrates, and two, things that were costly were reused. It's not uncommon that they took something off of one garment and put it on a new garment or another garment, or cut it into pieces and used it for something else. I know from my research into the Turkish oil, like I said, it wasn't just head coverings that were decorated. Dish towels were decorated as gifts to brides and mother-in-laws. Bedding, pillowcases were decorated. Aprons were decorated. Now, was that the one you wore in the kitchen? No, it's the one you tore off the one that you got dirty, you put the clean one on to go answer the door. Or to go run to town to market. You wanted to look pretty, just, like we make our husbands or girlfriends or boyfriends or whoever's the crafty fix-it person in our house change into a clean pair of pants and shirts before they go to Home Depot. I think they did the same thing. People are people. We really haven't changed. And the more I start researching into things, the more I realize that people are still people and they really weren't all that different back then. Again, like I was saying, if you look at, continue going down the line, it's a short veil. Actually, is that one? Sometimes I forget what I put in these handouts. That one I put in because I think it's interesting. It's very, very sheer. It's very similar to the one from 1460, but it looks to me like she's got it tucked into her neckline.
Yeah. Like it's tucked into the front.
Or wimpled one.
It's wimpled, yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure it's a wimple because of the way it weaves down. But she definitely has some kind of a band holding it on. which I think is interesting. We don't know who she is. There's been some, I try to research and make sure that if you look at my research paper on this, you'll see who all these women were and why they were painted. But we don't have time for that in this class. Her identity is unknown because they're not sure whether she was the wife or the mistress. And then Queen Elizabeth, if you look at the actual portrait, those little dots all over her veil are very large pearls. And I'm going to say that either they were not on there and they were painted on, which is a thing, which is why, again, what we see in paintings, we always have to take with a grain of salt as to whether it's accurate or not. I think painters, for the most part, were not tailors and seamstresses, so the fact that when I started in the SCA, everybody said there was no such thing in period as a 7 sleeve. But I started looking at portraits in the 1300s, and you can see seams in multiple paintings on clothing at the shoulder. That's a 7 sleeve. I don't think multiple artists would paint a seam where one did not exist. Decoration that didn't exist. I'm wearing a lovely blue gown. Please make it brocade. I can't afford brocade, but I really want my picture painted in brocade. Please paint brocade. And I think that was done. Please add pearls to my, make my jewelry more bloomy than it is. I think that was done.
There's no way that sheer material would lay like that if those were sewn on.
The pearls? No, it would have been hanging like a.
It would have just been.
Yeah. I think that they were added artistically later on, but it is a very long, very sheer, very royal veil. So that goes to my point about it. Then I decided, okay, I've done enough on veils. Where do I go next? Well, what are we decorating that with? I'm decorating mostly with beads and ribbons. I have not yet done my research on the ribbon manufacturer in the Middle Ages. That's probably going to be my next rabbit hole in this class. But this last year, I've been studying beads. And I found it fascinating because I just started using pretty beads to do this. And Mistress Louise had just used blue and white and yellow gold glass beads because those are the beads that she'd been using. She had not done any research as to what was being used. But they're pretty, and we see them all over, and we see veils with pearls in the SCA a lot. A lot of the times they're plastic pearls, because real pearls, oh my God, that would be so heavy with the number of pearls on some of those long veils we see on some of the queens. So I doubt very much that they're real pearls. But who cares? 10-foot roll. It's for the Society for Creative Anachronism, and it looks gorgeous. And if it makes you feel pretty, go for it. We can go all the way back again to before the Common Era to find evidence of beads from bone, from stone, from shell, wooden beads. And I have found documentation for seed beads, these little 2 to 3 millimeter faceted seed beads. You can see there is a picture of one. It's the blue one. It's made out of cobalt down here on the left. All the way back to the 1800s, or the 800s, I'm sorry. So she didn't know it, but these cobalt blue beads that she used are 100% period. The yellow ones probably also, and the plain glass we know is glass flowing, and beads were made, glass beads in period initially were not blown, they were pulled. And I'm not a glass worker, so that's all I can tell you about that, but there is evidence all over in Viking finds, in Italy, in France, in Spain, all over the Middle East, all over China and Japan. So beads have been a thing, and not just a thing for decoration, they were also used as currency. You could buy things with beads. They had a trade economy, not everything had to be coin. So they were trying to trace what kind of beads were where. There are Millefiori beads, which if you look on the right on here, those are the ones that look like they're called Millefiori and millions of flowers. Very well known in late Italy in like the 17 and 1800s, and you can still buy glassworks of that kind today. But beads of that type were found heavily in the Viking regions. Were they traded or were they made there? They have recently uncovered some glassworks in that area that had discarded remnants. They were making those beads.
Wow.
They are not just, again, the Italians are not
thought
solely
they were
responsible
treated
for
with
them. Yeah,
Wow.
that was a fun find. The glass and the use of beads goes all the way back to, again, the Middle East with Egyptian faience. Has anybody ever heard of that? It's a clay bead that's glazed with glass. So they didn't make the beads initially out of all glass, but they used glass to put a color or a shine or a pattern on. And if you look, that picture in the upper right-hand corner is some kind of, obviously it hung from something, it's got a loop on it, but it's great. And I wish I had the room to blow up the picture on the left that shows the assortment of beads, because there's a scale at the bottom that goes up to 5 centimeters. And you can see that some of those beads are pretty tiny. Any questions? Comments? Anything I didn't talk about that you want me to talk about? Come on, people, you're part of this class. Help me out here.
Just going back to crochet.
Sure.
At what period was it?
They found a piece of fabric, and everybody for years has been saying that prior to the 1700s, anything that looked like crochet was nail binding or finger loop braiding. But there is a piece of gold thread fabric that was found from the 1100s. It's on my website. And the experts have said this has got to be crochet.
This was in
The
Europe.
consistency of the knotwork and the pattern of the looping, it couldn't be anything but. Now we know that there has been a fishing industry since biblical time. That's well talked about. Nets were used, we know that. Nets are a form of knotwork. They used hook needles to fix their nets. Why couldn't they have been made smaller? But wait, they were. They fished with them. So to think that some woman was smart enough somewhere to take a hooked needle and use it to do one loop after another instead of her fingers, it's not a huge stretch.
Why are they saying that crochet is not, after a certain period, we know that knitting was around 1800. And all blame was around longer than that.
Right. What could crochet have been around that period? There's just been no evidence for it.
Because it's in my birthday.
Disintegrate. And it's a woman's thing for the most part, so it's not
It wasn't the
important.
church thing, it wasn't the royal thing, so it wasn't safe.
The attitude seems to be if there is no evidence for it, it must not have existed, which is kind of silly.
It's hard, it makes it hard to find,
Yeah.
because the people who were around back there aren't around to talk to.
Exactly.
If we don't have something in a museum somewhere, and something that furthered my love for decorating with beadings is I had an opportunity to go to Israel in 2016 for a friend's daughter's wedding. And I was there for 2 weeks, and we went everywhere. And one of the places that we went was Masada, which is a fortress. A fortress. It wasn't a fortress. It was literally just a community. Unfortunately, it was seized by the Romans. And when you are up on the bluff where Masada is in the desert, you can look down and you can see the remains of the Roman encampment surrounding them. It's in the middle of the desert. We were there in July, and it was 110 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
But it's a dry heat.
It is a dry heat, but I tell you, it's still getting hot.
It's dry in my oven, but it'll bake bread.
But they have a beautiful museum out there that they have put together from things that they have unearthed. And one of the things in one of the tableaus, they have these beautiful tableaus of everyday life set up in the museum. It's really quite impressive. Are these hermetically sealed cases of things that they have found. Spoons, knives, pots, remnants of fabric. And almost 100% intact beaded hairnet. And the netting was done with threads like this.
Oh, holy cow.
Very, very, very fine with little teeny tiny beads. Beautiful, multicolored, all different colored beads. Not in any kind of pattern, but just, and no photography was allowed.
Oh.
So you have to take my word for it, but I did see it with my own eyes. And if anybody goes to Asriel, Baroness Aliyah, go through the museum, it was well worth it.
Does the museum have a website?
I've not been able to find it. I know. But that doesn't mean it's not coming.
Sure.
Because there's more and more stuff out there every day. Any questions? That was a good question, thank you. All right, I'm done if you are.